from Lisbon to Prague, and in the early part of the new century these voluntarily opened up broader paths of study and intercourse which rendered their life more fertile and informal. In the Middle Ages, education had largely been confined to training the clergy. Now it was steadily extended, and its purpose became to turn out not only priests, but lay scholars and well-informed gentlemen. The man of many parts and accomplishments became the Renaissance ideal. This quickening of the human spirit was accompanied by a questioning of long-held theories. For the first time, in the course of the 15th century, men began to refer to the preceding millennium as the Middle Ages. Though much that was medieval survived in their minds, men felt they were living on the brink of a new and modern age. It was an age marked not only by splendid achievements in art and architecture, but also by the beginnings of a revolution in science, associated with the name of Copernicus. That the earth moved round the sun, as he conclusively proved, and Galileo later asserted on a celebrated occasion, was a novel idea that was to have profound effects upon the human outlook. Hitherto, the earth had been thought of as the centre of a universe all designed to serve the needs of man. Now, vast new perspectives were opening. The urge to inquire, to debate, and seek new explanations spread from the field of classical learning into that of religious studies. Greek and even Hebrew texts, as well as Latin, were scrutinized afresh. Inevitably, this led to the questioning of accepted religious beliefs. The Renaissance bred the Reformation. In 1517, at the age of 34, Martin Luther, a German priest, denounced the sale of indulgences, nailed his theses on this and other matters on the door of Wittenberg Castle Church, and embarked on his venturesome intellectual foray with the Pope. What began as a protest against church practices soon became a challenge to church doctrine. In this struggle, Luther displayed qualities of determination and conviction at the peril of the stake, which won him his name and fame. He started or gave an impulse to a movement which, within a decade, swamped the continent, and proudly bears the general title of the Reformation. It took different forms in different countries, particularly in Switzerland under Zwingli and Calvin. The latter's influence spread from Geneva across France to the Netherlands and Britain, where it was most strongly felt in Scotland. There are many varieties of Luther's doctrine, but he himself adhered rigorously to the principle of salvation by faith, not works. This meant that to lead a good and upright life on earth, as many pagans had done, was no guarantee of eternal bliss. Belief in the Christian revelation was vital. The words of Holy Writ and the promptings of individual conscience, not papal authority, were Luther's guiding lights. He himself believed in predestination. Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden because Almighty God made him do so. Hence the original sin of man. About 1/10 of the human race might escape or have escaped consequential eternal damnation in the intervening years. All monks and nuns alike were, however, entitled to console themselves by getting married. Luther himself set the example by marrying a fugitive nun when he was 40, and lived happily ever after. The Reformation affected every country in Europe, but none more than Germany. Luther's movement appealed to the nationalism of the German people, who were restive under the exactions of Rome. He gave them a translation of the Bible of which they have remained rightly proud. He also gave the German princes the opportunity to help themselves to church property. His teachings in the hands of extremists led to a social war in southern Germany, in which scores of thousands of people perished. Luther himself was passionately on the opposite side to the masses he had inflamed. Though he'd used, in the coarsest terms, the language which roused the mob, he did not hesitate to turn on them when they responded. He would go to all lengths to fight the Pope on doctrinal issues, but the oppressed multitude who gave him his strength did not make effective appeal to him. He called them pigs and grosser names, and rebuked the overlords, as he described the aristocracy and well-to-do governing powers, for their slackness in repressing the peasants' rebellion. Heresies there'd always been, and over the centuries feeling against the Church had often run strong in almost every country of Europe. But the schism that had begun with Luther was novel and formidable. All the actors in it, the enemies and the defenders of Rome alike, were still deeply influenced by medieval views. They thought of themselves as restorers of the purer ways of ancient times and of the early Church. But the Reformation added to the confusion and uncertainty of an age in which men and states were tugging unwillingly and unwittingly at the anchors that had so long held Europe. After a period of ecclesiastical strife between the papacy and the Reformation, Protestantism was established over a great part of the continent under a variety of sects and schools, of which Lutheranism covered the larger area. The Church in Rome, strengthened by the heart-searching Catholic revival known as the Counter-Reformation, and in the more worldly sphere by the activities of the Inquisition, proved able to maintain itself through a long series of religious wars. The division between the assailants and defenders of the old order threatened the stability of every state in modern Europe and wrecked the unity of some. England and France came out of the struggle scarred and shaken, but in themselves united. A new barrier was created between Ireland and England, a new bond of unity forged between England and Scotland. The Holy Roman Empire of the German people dissolved into a dust of principalities and cities. The Netherlands split into what we now know as Holland and Belgium. Dynasties were threatened, old loyalties forsworn. By the middle of the century, the Calvinists were the spearhead of the Protestant attack, the Jesuits the shield and sword of Catholic defence and counterattack. Not for another 100 years would exhaustion and resignation put an end to the revolution that began with Luther. It ended only after Central Europe had been wrecked by the 30 Years' War, and the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 terminated a struggle whose starting point had been almost forgotten. It was not until the 19th century that a greater sense of toleration, based upon mutual reverence and respect, ruled the souls of men throughout the Christian world. A well-known Victorian divine and lecturer, Charles Beard, in the 1880s poses some blunt questions. Was, then, the Reformation, from the intellectual point of view, a failure? Did it break one yoke only to impose another? We are obliged to confess that, especially in Germany, it soon parted company with free learning, that it turned its back upon culture, that it lost itself in a maze of arid theological controversy, that it held out no hand of welcome to awakening science. Even at a later time, it has been the divines who have most loudly declared their allegiance to the theology of the Reformation, who have also looked most askance at science, and claimed for their statements an entire independence of modern knowledge. I do not know how, on any ordinary theory of the Reformation, it is possible to answer the accusations implied in these facts. The most learned, the profoundest, the most tolerant of modern theologians would be the most reluctant to accept in their fullness the systems of Melanchthon and of Calvin. The fact is that while the services which the Reformers rendered to truth and liberty by their revolt against the unbroken supremacy of medieval Christianity cannot be overestimated, it was impossible for them to settle the questions which they raised. Not merely did the necessary knowledge fail them, but they did not even see the scope of the controversies in which they were engaged. It was their part to open the floodgates, and the stream, in spite of their well-meant efforts to check and confine it, has since rushed impetuously on, now destroying old landmarks, now fertilizing new fields, but always bringing with it life and refreshment. To look at the Reformation by itself, to judge it only by its theological and ecclesiastical development, is to pronounce it a failure. To consider it as part of a general movement of European thought, to show its essential connection with ripening scholarship and advancing science, to prove its necessary alliance with liberty, to illustrate its slow growth into toleration, is at once to vindicate its past and to promise its future. While the forces of Renaissance and Reformation were gathering strength in Europe, the world beyond was yielding its secrets to European explorers.